Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Minkoff from SIA Partners, and this training is part two of the training on using the Compass EZ tool for improving co-occurring capability in any kind of behavioral health program, meaning adult, child, mental health, substance use disorder treatment, etc. And the goal of doing this is to move within your organization within a quality improvement process to build co-occurring capability, which means designing policies, procedures, practices, practice supports, competencies on the assumption that the next person coming in the door will have co-occurring mental health and substance issues as well as other complex needs, and that all of the organization of the way services are delivered is designed to support the best matched integrated services for those individuals or families that the program routinely sees within its mission and resources. This training is designed to give you a set of instructions for how to think about organizing your program's improvement process after you have done the self-assessment in that program using the Compass EZ tool. And the training focuses on two aspects. One is, how do you organize your change process generally within what we call the 12 steps of program development? And the second is, how do you focus within the training, within the improvement process, on the specifics of what you are going to do within your program quality improvement plan, or what we often call a program action plan. What we're going to be doing here is focusing on the 12 steps of co-occurring capability development and how those connect to the details of what's in the action plan. I'm going to show you the action planning template that we often use, although you are welcome to use your own, identify common starting places, and talk about some of the specific examples of what an action plan might look like for you, so that the action plan itself is both measurable and achievable and allows you to take practical steps of progress in the direction of your overall goal of becoming co-occurring capable. These 12 steps are a way of conceptualizing the improvement process generally within which the compass takes place. So the first step, and for many of you, this is a review of things that you've already done, is that you've communicated at the leadership level that the goal of what you're doing is to achieve co-occurring capability for all programs, or for all the programs that you're focusing on in this round of your improvement process. This has been communicated officially to all the involved staff. Staff have had an opportunity to discuss it and understand that it's connected not to some external mandate, but to their own vision and values of being helpful to the people in front of them, who they've already had the experience of working with individuals and or families who have co-occurring mental health and substance needs. The next thing that is important to have in place is a team that's going to be working on this process within the organization that owns the responsibility for the improvement across the programs that are going to be involved, that represent those programs and represent people at different levels of the organization, including folks with enough management leadership level to have some ability to empower the process, as well as people who are working within the programs involved who can contribute to the overall discussion. And because this is a marathon, as they say, not a sprint, it's important to have this team be able to meet regularly, even if that pace is slower than you might hope for, in order to keep this process going over an extended period of time. Because the process of development, which we often call a recovery process for organizations, is slow and steady, step by step over an extended period. And many organizations do, which gets them not where they ultimately want to go, is they'll handle this like an intense project, and they'll work very diligently for a very short period of time. They'll make a few steps of progress and then they'll stop. And then after a year or two, they realize they didn't get where they wanted to go and feel like they have to start all over again. And it's better to just build something that holds the process over time and regard it as a sustainable improvement activity within the organization generally. It can be attached to other CQI structures or processes so that it feels more sustainable. But the important aspect of this is paying attention to the actual quality improvement targets and the action planning that we're going to be discussing, so that that you make progress for a period of time, then you review what you're doing, you look at it, you think about it some more, and then you make more progress. At intervals, you redo the Compass EZ, often at 1-year intervals or 18-month intervals, sometimes more frequently, to reevaluate where you are and to pick new targets for your improvement activity. It's also helpful for organizations to recognize that a lot of the value of this is building processes at the level of care delivery, so that including people in the process who are on the front line clinicians, receptionists, people with lived experience who are sometimes receiving services or delivering services in each program, allows you to build what you're doing in a way that's connected to the experiences of people in service and people delivering service. And to create that so that within each program, there's a team of people who are owning the change, and that some of those frontline people are represented on the organizational quality improvement team that's described in number 2, allows you to really do this in a way that is doing things with staff instead of doing things to staff, and empowers people to feel like they have the ability to contribute to the way the organization delivers services in a way that's lined up with what people need, the level of complexity they regularly experience, and their own values of wanting to be as helpful as possible. One of the things that's important in developing co-occurring capability is emphasizing the message and then operationalizing the message in the improvement plan, that this is not just something that special staff do and other people don't, so much as all the staff need to be able to have a set of instructions, tools, guidance within their job and within their level of training, which means that for most staff, it's important to make this really simple so that people feel like this is not something that has to be intimidating, but it's built within their own ability to be helpful to people. And providing tools and instructions that make that helpfulness really simple, both for the people providing services as well as for the people receiving services, so everyone can be more successful. And this often feels daunting, but one of the things that I will be illustrating as we talk about the content of the action plans is the way in which making the action plan simpler helps it to be more accessible to staff and clients. And also that part of what we want you to avoid is what we call the training trap. And the training trap is that, many programs will do this. They'll say, oh, the focus of our action plan is to just send everybody to a training, as if you can go into a training and come out the other end and somehow know everything you need to know to implement co-occurring capable care. And the training alone is the evidence-based worst practice for implementing sustainable practice improvement in a program or in an organization. And in fact, very often, people try to overload training with so much content that staff wind up feeling, rather than feeling empowered and more capable, they wind up feeling overwhelmed and feel like this is something they can't possibly master. And so less is more. And breaking the competency development down into small steps based on what you've targeted in the competency discussion, which involves the staff themselves, and lining them up with the principles of co-occurring capability and the comprehensive continuous integrated system of care, helps you to make this simple and more achievable as you move through this over time. And then any training that you provide should be connected immediately to the idea that you're training people just enough so that they can begin to practice what they're doing on a regular basis, aligned with policy, procedure, and practice, supported by supervision and coaching that happens regularly, and solidified into what the normal processes of the organization are. And I will, again, reinforce some of those issues as we go through. So within this context and messaging, at this point, you have used the Compass EZ to conduct a program self-assessment baseline conversation. And if you're watching this out of order, we have a part 1 of this training for you to go back and do so that you know how to do the Compass EZ and so forth. And I want to remind everyone that the Compass EZ has a scoring mechanism that allows each team to come together and choose a number for each item on the tool that represents the degree to which you've made progress on that item. But the most important thing that you want to make sure not to lose in doing the Compass are the notes that come out of the discussion that help to identify in the conversation places where people say, oh, there's something we can do something about. And those places don't need to be the most challenging things or the places where you have the lowest scores or the places where you feel like this is the hardest thing to think about. More importantly, it's like, oh, here's an area in which it makes sense to us that we can improve something in our program. And it's helpful to start with things that may seem a bit easier to focus on and people can get some energy around, because it's progressive. As you begin to build progress toward co-occurring capability with things that seem relatively easier, it gives you a foundation for continuing to tackle things in subsequent rounds of improvement that may be initially a little bit harder, and you make progress more smoothly as you go, as people develop a better understanding of where this is going. So once you have done the self-assessment, not only do you have a set of scores, but you look through the different items and the different sections of the compass, and you say, oh, look, here are some notes about things we want to work on. And those notes become important parts of your improvement plan. Now, in a large organization with multiple programs, what usually happens is that the organization as a whole may identify some targets that everybody should be moving toward. Sometimes those targets come from an external driver across the system, so that in the current community of practice that this training is connected to, one of the targets that everyone has agreed to is the importance of improving the ability to identify people with co-occurring mental health and substance issues, whether or not they've already been diagnosed, so that we begin to get in our data system a more accurate reflection of the prevalence of co-occurring along the lines of co-occurring as an expectation, so that this helps to anchor all of the improvement activities in place. So that becomes something that all the organizations have committed to, so that every program would need to include that in its action plan. But in a diverse organization, the targets for the action plans may vary from program to program, and that's perfectly appropriate. I mean, what would be important to the mobile crisis team or the crisis residential program might be quite different from what's going on in an outpatient clinic that's focusing on developing a CCBHC status, for example, might be different from a residential substance treatment program and the like. So that diversity of approach, as well as commonality approach, allows for each program to have some level of empowerment and discretion in terms of what it's learned from its own self-assessment and the content of what the action plan will include. So what this number 6, these are the 12 steps. The 6th step is develop the program action plan based on the results of the compass. And the key words here are achievable. So if you create an action plan that's not achievable, that's on your own perfectionism. And you're advised within this framework to slow down. Slow down probably more than you would initially imagine, because building co-occurring capability is literally addressing very concrete processes within your own program or organization that are mismatched to the people in front of you. It's not about developing a whole new layer of process. It's not about rushing everybody into a new set of content. It's about looking at what you're currently doing and thinking, how do we concretely take steps to move us in a different direction that allows us to be more lined up with who we are actually serving? And the more that we can make these steps very small, concrete, measurable, allow our staff to find specific ways of entering into this that feel achievable to them as well as to our organization, the more successful that we are going to be. And because I call this a recovery process for organizations, it's helpful if our program action plans are thought about as program recovery plans, where we're developing step-by-step, day-at-a-time progress, rounds of applause for each day of progress, that allow us to move in the direction of matching what we do to the people we're actually serving. So in this slide, the action plan should be simple and doable and derived from what you've learned in your Compass EZ conversation. The action plans are also dynamic in the sense that they are small steps for relatively short periods of time, a few months, and then revisited and frequently updated to find the next step. So quality improvement, but continuous quality improvement in the same way that an individual client's recovery plan is a day at a time and continually evolving as more things are learned and more challenges are encountered, and more foundation allows for the ability to address those challenges as they come along. Now, what do we look at in the way in which the action plan is focused? So we call these the 6 C's of action planning. They're a little bit artful, but so the first thing is that this is about co-occurring capability. So whatever it is you're thinking of doing, and many things will come to you as a result of this process, don't lose track of the fact that the goal ultimately is addressing people who have both mental health and substance issues as well as other complexities. So, for example, a lot of programs, when they go into this, one of the things that people get excited about is the idea of improving welcoming in general. And they'll look around and say, you know, our whole office isn't very welcoming and it's drab and it hasn't been painted in 30 years and all kinds of stuff like that. And people will get very excited about creating a more welcoming environment by just making it prettier. And that's a good thing. I mean, we certainly support the idea that your physical plant should be welcoming in general. But some aspect of what you're doing should be focused on how do we communicate as well that we're welcoming people who have co-occurring issues into a program that's labeled mental health or a program that's labeled addiction or alcohol and drug. And so that part always needs to be included in your action plan as you're thinking about what you're doing. Although the foundation of working with people with co-occurring is going to help you work with everybody. Committed, meaning that we are doing something that indicates that we are actually intending to follow through. So it's not just a plan that we put off in a corner and, as if we're writing it for some external. This is our plan that we're committed to doing. Comprehensive in the sense that not that we're going to do everything, but that for the issue that we're trying to address, we want to make sure that we're attending to the details that help us to do that issue. So it's more about digging into a level of detail that helps us to make it more concrete, which is the next C. And simple steps are going to be more helpful. And one of the enemies for concreteness is our own tendency to make things more complicated, more abstract, more jargony, and we then make things harder for ourselves. We want what we're doing to be connected to reality in our program and connected to the work that our staff is actually doing and the services that our clients actually receive. And we always want to keep in mind that this is a continuous quality improvement process, which means that we are moving through rapid cycles of change, relatively rapid. We do the compass, we evaluate our baseline, we identify a plan, we do the plan, we see what happens after we've made some progress, and then we go back and cycle through it again. Plan, do, check, act cycles, or plan, do, study, act cycles in the spirit of quality improvement. So now let's move into the common starting places for action plans, and we'll talk about how those work. So this is a sample action plan template. What you may notice is it's laid out a little bit like a treatment plan may be laid out or a recovery plan, and we call it a recovery plan for programs or organizations. So it has a date on it. These slides were put together in 2023. And up on the top, you have in the lower right-hand corner of the top section is a good place to put down, what you've agreed you want your program to become in terms of co-occurring capability, however you want to word that for yourselves. So it feels like this is something that you're working on for yourself, not for me or for anybody else. And putting down the team members who are working on this within the program. And then in the upper left, you want to give yourself credit for the work you've already done. And remember, this is not a one-time thing. You may be using the same template over and over again as you develop your improvement activities. And by the way, the plan itself will be available along with these slides with the training in a Word, an editable format, so you can take it and use it and adapt it however you want for your own purpose. So, you talk about, look, we've done a great job. We've gotten ourselves excited. We've talked about this. We did the self-assessment. We learned a lot of things. We've already begun doing some things even before we got to our formal action plan. And this is where we're building. These are the things we're already working on. Yay, us. And our plan is going to take us the next concrete steps forward. And below in the template, it says list 3 or 4 issues that were identified through the Compass self-assessment. Now, so here's the thing. When you go through the Compass self-assessment, you will find many, many, many areas where you have opportunities to improve in the language of quality improvement opportunities. there are very few places where you will have perfect 5 scores. But the goal of this is not to try to improve everything, but to focus on improving anything and to take a few things that really make sense as foundational areas of work for you to address in your improvement plan. And it lists some usual starting places. Okay, welcoming access, removing access barriers, building hope and strength into the way we communicate with people during assessments, during service plans. The important one of everybody getting better at recognizing the population in the data system, finding steps to help staff develop the ability to do the next little baby step of competency development, which may vary depending on what kind of program you're in. And I'll give you some examples as we move through this. And you would identify some of those, and you'll see on the slide, it says 1, issue welcoming, improve welcoming policies and practices is an issue that we're doing. And then it has some objectives, what you might want to do. And then it has, as in a service plan, what do we do? Who's doing it? And it's helpful because it's a team effort to try to distribute activities to different team members so people are involved rather than relying on only one person to do all the work, whether that person is a manager or a change agent or some other person. It's helpful for the team to really own this in a certain way. And then we have some time frames, milestones of progress for us to do things. And this is kind of basic project management. It often requires several steps that are iterative in order to accomplish a simple goal. So let me give an example just around welcoming, which is a common place to start. So one of the things that folks may look at, one of the early questions in the Compass EZ, is it says program descriptions specifically say that people with co-occurring conditions are welcomed for care. And this is an area where folks will often find an improvement opportunity. It doesn't feel too hard, but at the same time, it's not as easy as it may seem. So you look at your program description, and it may say nothing about welcoming anybody, and certainly not about welcoming people with co-occurring issues as an expectation, with the idea that when they come here, we're going to identify their issues and help them address all of their issues to make progress toward having beautiful lives, or language like that. And so you say, well, we want to actually address that thing that we discovered in the Compass because we want to say out loud that we're actually a co-occurring program that welcomes the people we're already seeing who have co-occurring needs. So how do we say that? So we may have a few of us who are going to take the step of looking at our current program description and creating a rough draft of that program description. And maybe it'll take us a month to work on it because we're not, super unbusy. We have only so much time. And we want to talk about it and think about it. And then we want to take that draft and bring it back to our team. And the team is going to edit it. We're going to create another draft. That's another step in the small step of interventions with another time frame and a set of objectives. And then that draft has to be probably approved upstream in our organization. And then we have to roll it into our language. And although that seems in a certain sense tedious, the process of actually thinking together about what is the message that we're actually giving people, because you're not writing this for the tool. As soon as you get into this, you're communicating, welcoming to the co-occurring clients and potentially to people who might refer clients to you. That say, we love working with people with co-occurring needs. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sending them to us. This is our job. And then very often that will create other discussions to say, well, wait a minute, do we really welcome them? Is this the message we want to say? I mean, how do we do this? Because we're mental health. Are we allowed to say this? And some of those discussions really help you to deepen your understanding of what it means to be co-occurring capable. Another example of doing something like this is getting back to what I said earlier about, the way your building looks is not only to make the building prettier in general, but to say what happens when people walk in our door who have co-occurring issues. So, a typical addiction program, for example, there's all kinds of posters about addiction recovery. There's the 12 steps on the wall. There's 12 traditions on the wall. There's pamphlets about substances all over the place. But there's no messaging about mental health at all. So when you look around, you're thinking, if I'm a person who's coming with a co-occurring mental illness, am I allowed to even mention it here? Or am I only supposed to act like addiction is the only problem I have? And so then when you go through it, you'll have a team of people who'll do the walkthrough. Maybe you'll invite some clients to look around, say, what can we do to make this feel more welcoming to people who have mental illnesses as well as addiction in our program? Maybe we need some pamphlets. Maybe we need some posters. And those become the steps. Where are we going to find them? What do we like? Where are we going to put them? And that becomes an adventure. But the process of creating that environment helps you to realize more clearly that you actually are in the co-occurring business as a program. So I'll be talking a little bit in a future slide, but it just gives you an idea of how this template becomes a work plan for you. And the simpler you make it, I know it feels frustrating, like, oh, it's going to take us so long to make a change. We're never going to get anywhere, which is, of course, exactly what clients feel when you start them down the one day at a time path. But take pride in the fact that you're accomplishing these small steps. That's exactly what this is all about. And then remember to keep going. Okay. And very often when you do your initial compass, you'll have many things that you could pick to work on. You may not do all of them at once, but after you've done a few, then you'll feel like you want to add more, even without doing the compass again. So that one round of compass doing can give you a sequence of things to pay attention to, provided that you keep track of the notes and the discussion and you're able to bring them up to use them to keep going forward after you've accomplished the first few things. Okay, so in the next several steps are things to focus on within your action plan. And one of the things I already talked about was creating the welcoming experience in program spaces, welcoming in the program descriptions. Now, another thing that you may work on is something as simple as how do you communicate in a welcoming way to people who come in with active symptoms in the other domain. And one of the things that's sometimes helpful here, and people sometimes decide to work on, is something as simple as what do we say to people? And sometimes you want to put little welcoming scripts in different places where people get met. Sometimes at the beginning of an assessment or in an intake process. Within the integrated longitudinal strength-based assessment format, which we've made available, there's a welcoming little speech right at the beginning that's inserted into the format. And you may think, well, maybe we want to put some prompts so that all of our staff begin to practice. The simple thing is, if you tell me that you have co-occurring issues, I'm going to let you know that's a good thing. I'm happy that you did. Welcome to our program. This is hard for you to do. We know you may have many, many needs. And in our program, we love having the opportunity to help people with mental health issues, substance issues, and all kinds of issues make progress on all their issues to have happy and successful lives. And that's what we do. So saying that out loud is part of what helps you feel like you're communicating. If somebody tells you things, that's what you want to hear, as opposed to you're more complicated than I planned. You may also wind up looking at other rules in the welcoming and access department that says if someone comes in and it seems like they're under the influence, what do we do? In our mental health setting, do we talk to them? And we want to say, we want to recognize that somebody coming in who may be under the influence, we want to carry on that conversation and help them feel like they're in the right place. Get as much information as we can, leave that person feeling hopeful, welcomed, and engaged so that whatever happens next, they're more likely to come back and stay connected to us. So how do we do that? What would that procedure look like? What do we say to people? How do we write that down? And that becomes a very important, concrete step to pay attention to. Okay. And those kind of things require a fair bit of discussion and conversation just to accomplish that one policy shift. And it's important to have that team discussion, but always remembering that the goal of this is matching your policies and procedures to the experience of the people with co-occurring needs who are regularly showing up. So now let's look at, because every program action plan in the community of practice project, and ideally every program action plan that gets involved in this process in the state of Maine will be focusing on improving its ability to recognize how many co-occurring people are being seen, and certainly within children's services, how many co-occurring families are being seen. And the issue here is not so much screening, because most everybody already has some screening process that they've put in place. The issue is how do we actually document when someone has co-occurring issues? In other words, if we've been screening in an addiction program for mental health issues, whether or not we know what the person's diagnosis is, if they're screening positively, this tells us that this is a person with co-occurring issues. We need to figure out what's going on so that we can help them properly while they're here. So we need to count them as someone with co-occurring issues that need an important next step of continuing assessment, and we need to be able to address whatever their mental health issues are in their service plan. They actually have a diagnosis. We want to document that, make sure that we're helping them understand their own diagnosis and understand how best to manage that illness that they are being diagnosed with while they're receiving substance treatment and trying to stay sober. So when it says the program action plan improves the consistency of screening and documentation, it means maybe you ask yourselves, have we done any kind of survey of our staff about how many co-occurring people they see, whether they've written it down anywhere or not? And this is very helpful because it gives us a rough idea of what our baseline is as a program. If we're working mostly with children, we want to look at families as well. How many families of the kids we're seeing with emotional disturbance also have co-occurring substance issues in the immediate caregivers or in siblings, so that we know the child is living in an environment where active substance use is going on, and we need to figure out how to intervene not only with the individual child, but with the family context as well, to help improve their ability to use substances in a way that are not harmful to the child, if nothing else. So one of the first steps in our action plan might be, let's just measure how many co-occurring people or families we think we see, informally, just by asking everybody to go through their caseloads and say yes, no, or maybe. And say, okay, Now let's take a look and see what's in our data system. And let's just press the data button and see what we come up with. And we know that the data button is going to show us a lot less than what we know is there. And there are a million reasons for this. And a lot of times folks tend to blame the data system, okay? But it's not the data system's fault. It's the fact that you are not putting the data in on a clinical level, and then you're not putting it in a way that the data system can tell you anything useful. So the next step might be, we're doing all this screening. Do we have a policy or procedure that says, what do you do with a positive screening so that the positive screening result is marked in a box in our data system so it's easy to capture? And then we're able to figure out what the next step is. Is the person already diagnosed? And that tells us something that we don't need to re-diagnose them. Or do they need further assessment? Okay, to determine, what do they have substance misuse or substance use disorder and how severe if they're in a mental health setting? And do they have a mental illness and how severe is their mental illness if they're in a substance setting and they haven't been diagnosed yet? Most of the time, people already show up with diagnoses and it's okay to document them. But what we find is that your action plan may focus simply on developing a procedure so that, that in an addiction program, your addiction counselors say, well, a person came in and they said they had schizophrenia, but I'm an addiction counselor. Am I allowed to write that down? Yes, you are. Okay, you're not making the diagnosis. You're documenting what you've been told. So we need a procedure for how to do that in our setting so that, as it says on the bullet, there's consistency of documentation. Okay. And then there's a process to kind of review what's going on, capture that information, and figure out what the right next step is for each client. And that's what I mean earlier by paying attention to the level of detail in a comprehensive and connected way, so that we're really paying attention to things that, for the addiction counselors in this example, it's not like you have to send them to training so they all know every detail about schizophrenia. That may be pretty scary. You do need to train people exactly what it is they're supposed to document and when, and how to ask for help from their supervisors if they're not sure. But it does get you organized around responding to the co-occurring issues and the people who are coming in your door. So you have good data on who they are and good next steps for each individual based on what they've documented. And otherwise, very often this information just floats out there and people are responding to it in a very inconsistent way until it becomes somehow dramatic and then becomes a big crisis and feels overwhelming. So this is what this looks like in the steps: screening and identification and counting and improving the data. Here's another common step, which is engaging people around hope and strength. And there's several different levels of this. But, one of the foundations of working with people with complex needs is the fact that they're more likely to lose hope because dealing with multiple issues and being bounced around and often feeling like, they can't figure out how to get a handle on more than one thing. So we want to, in our own action plan, one of the things that people might focus on is how good are we at identifying, communicating, and documenting people's most hopeful vision of a happy, meaningful life, and strengthening that and using it over time as we're working with people with complex needs. So we are, in fact, in the hope business. And so that can be an action plan. We look at what we're documenting in our current assessment, and we see that, we're not really paying much attention to the hopeful goals. They're in the wrong place in the assessment. They're not used in the service planning. We forget about them in the case presentation discussions. All of those can be very concrete improvement activities. One of the tools that, in terms of the spirit of practice improvement tools that we provide, is what we call the strength-based case presentation format, which starts with putting the person's most hopeful vision for themselves as one of the starting pieces of their case presentation, rather than just communicating all the deficits and the problems that they're creating. And so adopting that kind of case presentation format in small steps and having people practice with it, that can be a very important action plan. Similarly, for strength-based, again, most places are underusing a strength-based focus and struggling significantly because most of the way they work with people in general, and certainly even more with people who have co-occurring needs, is in a deficit-based way. So they're constantly looking at what the person's doing wrong and getting critical and trying to correct them and so forth, which is exactly the opposite way of being as helpful as possible. So beginning to develop the ability within an assessment, within a case presentation, within a service plan, to look at each issue and say, what is the person doing right for each issue? Where are the periods of success, and how did the person do right addressing multiple issues in a previous period of success? What did they do that helped them to stay sober with their mental illness? What did they do to manage their mental health symptoms while they were not using substances? And can we get very concrete on documenting that, helping them to recognize and reestablish their strengths and then help them do it better? And just focusing on one particular area where you can document this issue that people get excited about. Oh, here's a place where we can really get into this. Would be very helpful if in our assessments we looked at for a period of previous success and really documented. Okay, well, let's get a team together. Where would we put that? What would it say? How do we develop some basic instructions for everybody? How do we practice that with a few clients? How do we bring that back to the team and talk about it? That also becomes pieces of improvement that are now step by step grounded into our improvement activity. And as you can see, putting this in an action plan is the thing that I keep coming back to, is taking these small steps and really grounding them into a place where they're supported by policy, procedure, practice, paperwork. There's reinforcement of supervision and coaching and team-based practice for these individuals. That's really what solidifies this. And as you do this with things that feel more exciting in the beginning and easier in the beginning, then it allows you to build further along. What's the next one that people often work on? And particularly in mental health settings, one of the starting places is the recognition that inside mental health, in particular, this occurs in the substance side as well, and you can do this there as well, is that people come in with substance issues of all kinds, but you can't refer them to substance treatment because they don't want to go. This is not something they're thinking is something they want to, go to special treatment for. And they're in all different stages of change. Pre-contemplation, they don't want to talk about it. Contemplation, they'll talk about it, but not do anything. They may be willing to make a small step of change that they don't know how. That's preparation. They're doing some things to try to control their substance use, but they're not doing all the things you wish they were. We call that early action. They're trying to address their substance use, but they're not being successful. We call that late action. They need more help to know what to do. Or they're actually in a period of stability and they're trying not to go backwards, which we call maintenance. Whatever stage they're in, we need to identify the stage for their substance use. And then we find we also have to address their stage for other issues as well, so that we're addressing multiple issues in the service plan. And they may be in different stages for each issue. They're in work action for their mental health condition. Maybe they're in action of some sort for their housing. They're in contemplation about substance use, and our service plan is integrated and stage matched. So let's say this is something that pops up during the compass and we say, oh my goodness, we're not really doing the stage matching. Maybe we're documenting stage, but then the interventions aren't stage matched, or only documenting stage for one issue. Let's move forward. So let's say we're going to practice documenting stage for multiple issues. Okay, well, how would we do that? Where would we put it? How do we build it into some kind of consistent conversation? And we could have a training on what the stages mean and do, but mostly the training is about how we practice it on a regular basis and get better at it. And as we're documenting stages, the next thing we're going to want to figure out is, how do we know what a stage matched intervention looks like? How do we talk about it? How do we work as a team to routinely adopt that language in our individual work, in our group supervision work, and so on, so that every time we're thinking about an intervention, we're reminded that the intervention needs to be stage matched, and the outcome of that intervention would be stage matched. So we're not expecting people to move any faster than they're likely to move, and we understand what success looks like in a stage-based way. It's very concrete. You have to slow down in order to be successful. Okay. And then here's another one. As we put this together, all of these things come together in developing an approach to recovery planning and programming. So we have a recovery plan template that looks a lot like the action plan template, which has hopeful goals and strengths for the client, and each primary issue has a stage of change and stage match interventions. And it may be a lot to do all of that at once. It may be that you work within your recovery plan to do one or two of these things as you're building the framework for integrated service planning. Programming is also very important. And one of the things to look at in any program is, how are we including attention to the co-occurring issue in our programming? And so one of the things that may come up, let's say in the substance program now, is that we recognize that all of our groups need to be co-occurring groups. And then we panic and we say, oh my God, where are we going to hire all the mental health people to do our co-occurring groups? And then we realize, wait a minute, we're the ones who can do the co-occurring groups. Because if the clients have to figure out how their mental health issues are managed during their recovery, certainly we as addiction folks can help them figure that out as well. And so one of the things in a group is, how do we help our clients even start to share their mental health issues in groups? How do we prompt those discussions? How do we create simple things in our group curricula that remind clients that if we're talking about leisure time activities, that we're going to prompt them? So, hey, talk about how your mental health issues might affect your leisure time participation when you're sober. And don't worry, you're not the only one who's struggling with mental health issues during sobriety. Almost everybody else in the group is. And we all may have some good ideas for how to help each other through this. This is a dual recovery context. We may want to, so just doing that in small steps, let's open up those conversations. Let's help each of us start to feel comfortable having a discussion about in the group or individually with clients about their mental health issues. Feel like it's okay as an addiction counselor to ask clients, what are the tools you use when your mental health symptoms are active to get through the day without using? What are your self-management tools? How do you ask for help for that? How do you ask for help in group? Those kinds of things help make this very concrete. So we're actually starting to improve our programming in simple ways. We may also want to build in access to mental health tools and pamphlets so that people who have certain diagnoses can read about them and with their counselor, to learn together about, here's what major depression looks like. Here's what bipolar disorder looks like. What aspects of this do I relate to? How can I learn from this to help me manage my own condition while I'm not using substances? So these basic things are things that people can put in their action plan. Another area that's not listed here is building partnerships between mental health and addiction programs. And again, this is something you can add in small steps. You can do that within your agency as well as outside your agency. But let's say you're trying to be a CCBHC and you have a substance program now somewhere and you have a mental health program. How do those two programs partner with each other so that the mental health folks can consult to the substance folks and the substance folks can consult to the mental health folks? So more people can get what they need in a single door. And your action plan may say, let's build that kind of collaborative partnership. Let's all meet together once. That's a step. Let's talk about how one of us can attend the other one of us's team meetings and provide some consultation. Let's see if we can reduce referrals. Okay. And moving through that, developing that kind of co-occurring partnership and cross-consultation and in-reach process, step by step, over a period of months. Less is more. It doesn't have to be perfect. Progress, not perfection, is also something that can be included in an action plan in an ongoing way. So this is the conclusion of this training. And what my goal was to give you a variety of ideas about where you can take first steps in the co-occurring capability development process. Obviously, there's many, many more possibilities, but the goal is to help you get a sense for how the compass leads you to discover some areas where you want to improve and how the action planning is a piece of structured improvement where the more that you can make the steps of change concrete and simple and more achievable over a short period of time, the more successful you will be and the easier it will be to continue. And once you've accomplished your first round of change, you just keep on going. And at some point, you'll redo the compass and get some new ideas, applaud some progress, and move on from there. So great work. Keep up the good work, and hope you have a good time improving and having fun with both changing your program as well as experiencing more success with the people you're serving.